He walked into Celestine, one of the most expensive restaurants in the city, wearing a shirt that hadn't been ironed in 3 days. The maitre d' recognized him immediately, of course. Every employee did. But they'd been trained well. Nobody flinched. Nobody bowed. Nobody said his name. That was the deal. That had always been the deal on nights like this. Ethan Cole sat down at table 7, a corner booth with soft amber lighting and a view of the entire dining room, and waited. Her name was Brittany. Mutual friends had arranged it. She'd looked beautiful in the photos she'd sent over. Warm smile, he'd thought. Maybe this time. She arrived 12 minutes late, already scanning the room with the particular expression of a woman cataloging her surroundings for status. When her eyes landed on Ethan, the wrinkled shirt, the plain watch, the unremarkable shoes, something behind her smile went flat. She sat. They ordered. The conversation was polite but strained, the way conversations are when one person is already disappointed and the other one is watching. Then the sommelier came over. "Would you like to see the wine menu, sir?" Brittany's eyes lit up. She reached for the leather-bound list before the sommelier could even extend it. "Oh, let's get the Chateau Margaux," she said, already handing it back. She didn't look at Ethan. She didn't ask. She just decided. Ethan glanced at the list. The bottle was $4,000. "Maybe something a little more modest tonight," he said quietly. The table went cold. Brittany set her napkin down slowly, the way people do when they're making sure you notice. "Modest," she repeated. "Something in the 200s, maybe. Still a great wine." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked around the restaurant, at the chandelier, at the other tables, at the couples laughing over expensive meals, and she looked back at him with an expression that wasn't quite disgust, but lived in the same neighborhood. She leaned forward and lowered her voice. "You couldn't even afford the wine?" Ethan said nothing. She stood, picked up her bag, and said, "I'm sorry, I just remembered I have somewhere else to be." And she left, just like that. He sat alone at table 7 and watched her go. The sommelier appeared silently and refilled his water glass. Across the room, a couple was celebrating something. The woman was laughing, her head thrown back, and the man was watching her like she was the most extraordinary thing he'd ever seen. Ethan pulled out his phone and texted his assistant 2 words. "Another one." Then he picked up the wine list and ordered the Chateau Margaux for himself. After all, he owned the restaurant. His name was Ethan Cole, and if you typed it into any major financial publication, you'd find the same words orbiting him like planets. Visionary, ruthless, reclusive, worth approximately $4.7 billion. He'd built his first company at 23 from a rented desk in a building that smelled like mildew and ambition. He'd sold it at 27 for more money than most people could count. Then he'd done it again, and again, and again. By 35, he sat at the top of an empire that spanned logistics, real estate, private equity, and hospitality, including, yes, Celestine, and 11 other restaurants in 5 cities. He was the kind of man who walked into rooms and changed the temperature. And he was completely, profoundly alone. Not in the way that made good copy. Not in the dramatic, cinematic way. In the quiet way. The kind of alone you feel at 11 p.m. when the meetings are done and the apartment is silent, and the view from the 42nd floor is just lights, endless lights, none of them yours. He hadn't always been this guarded. There was a version of Ethan Cole, younger, softer, less armored, who had believed and loved the way you believe in things before the world teaches you better. He'd been engaged once, at 31, to a woman named Vivian who was beautiful and sharp and said all the right things. He'd trusted her completely. He'd shown her everything. The accounts, the properties, the plans, the version of himself that existed underneath all the success. 6 months before the wedding, he'd found the messages on her phone by accident. She'd left it on the kitchen counter unlocked, and the screen had lit up with something that rearranged his entire understanding of the last 2 years. She'd been with someone else, had been, apparently, the entire time. And what devastated him wasn't just the betrayal. It was the conversation he found earlier in the thread, from the beginning of their relationship, where she'd described him to a friend. Asterisk, he's worth billions. I'd be an idiot not to stay. Asterisk. He'd closed the app, set the phone face down, and never mentioned it. He'd ended the engagement the following week, citing irreconcilable differences, and said nothing more. He was, above everything else, a private man. But something had closed in him after that. Quietly, completely, like a door swinging shut on a still day. He began the test shortly after. Not as a game. He wasn't cruel. More as a filter. A way of seeing people before the money distorted the picture. He'd show up to dates dressed down. Old car. Modest suggestions. No name dropping. No hints. No subtle flexing. Just Ethan. Ordinary, unremarkable Ethan. And he'd watch to see who stayed and who didn't. Nobody stayed. There was the woman who insulted his shoes within the first 10 minutes. "I'm sorry, I just can't date a man who wears those," she'd said, gesturing downward like he'd arrived in clown feet. There was the one who pulled out her phone to check something the moment he suggested splitting the check and never really came back to the conversation. There was the one who'd laughed, actually laughed, when he mentioned he rented a one-bedroom apartment. "At your age," she'd said, "that's kind of sad." Each one confirmed the thesis. He became colder, more methodical. He stopped hoping and started observing, the way a scientist stops rooting for a particular outcome and just records what happens. His assistant, Marcus, had started referring to these outings as the experiments, and Ethan hadn't corrected him. Then one night in October, Marcus appeared in his office doorway with the expression of a man delivering news he wasn't sure would land well. "I've set up another one," he said. Ethan didn't look up from his laptop. "Cancel it. Her name's Lauren. She's a friend of your cousin's. Apparently very genuine. They're always apparently very genuine." "Sir." "Marcus, you're going to die alone surrounded by quarterly reports, and I'll have to write the press release." Ethan looked up. Marcus held his ground with the particular bravery of a man who'd worked for someone long enough to know where the lines were and how close he could get to them. "Fine," Ethan said. "Where?" "Aldane." 8 o'clock. Ethan arrived at 7:40. He didn't own Aldane, which was a deliberate choice. He'd learned that dining in restaurants he owned made the staff too nervous to behave naturally, and he liked to observe natural behavior. Aldane was a mid-range Italian place on the west side with good pasta and low lighting and the kind of noise level that swallowed conversations. He'd eaten here twice before. He took a table near the back and ordered sparkling water and looked at his phone. At 8:15, Lauren texted to cancel. "So sorry, family emergency. Can we reschedule?" He stared at the misspelling. "Reschedule." He typed back, "Of course. Hope everything's okay," and then sat for a moment with his water and the question of whether to leave. He didn't particularly want to go back to the apartment. The lights from 42 floors up had been looking particularly indifferent lately. He picked up the menu. That was when he noticed her. She was moving between tables with the particular efficiency of someone who'd learned to navigate crowded spaces without wasting motion. Dark hair pulled back. A small red mark on her wrist from where her sleeve kept catching. She was writing down an order at the table beside him, nodding as the couple spoke, and there was something in her face. A tiredness she hadn't quite managed to hide, but underneath it, something steady. Like a light left on in a window. She finished with the couple and turned toward him. "Hi, sorry to keep you waiting. Can I start you with something while you look?" "Just water for now," he said. "Thank you." She smiled briefly and started to turn, and then her elbow caught the edge of the small service tray on the stand beside his table, and the glass of ice water on it went directly onto the front of his shirt. Everything stopped. She went completely still. Her face went white. "Oh my God," she said. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." She was already reaching for napkins, pressing them toward him. "I'll pay for the dry cleaning. Please, I'm so sorry." "Hey," he said. "Hey, it's okay. It's really not. It's a shirt." He looked down at the spreading wet patch. Honestly, it needed washing anyway. She stopped, looked at him, waited for the other shoe. It didn't drop. Something in her shoulders released by about half an inch. "Most men would have yelled," she said quietly. "Actually, most men in here would have asked for the manager by now." He started blotting the shirt himself with the napkins. "Good thing I'm not most men." She watched him for a moment. Then something shifted in her expression, not quite a smile yet, but the shape of one. "I'll get you some club soda," she said. "And your meal is on me tonight. The house, I mean. Not literally me. I don't. I just mean I'll take care of it." He shook his head. "You don't have to do that. I want to." She came back with club soda and helped him dab the shirt into something approaching presentable, and at some point during the process the tension broke entirely, and they were just two people laughing about a wet shirt in an Italian restaurant. Her name was Claire. She'd been working double shifts at Aldane for 8 months. She was 29. Her mother had been sick, a progressive condition, nothing immediately life-threatening, but expensive and exhausting and always present. And the medical bills had reorganized Claire's entire life around the question of money. She'd told him that not as a complaint, but as a fact. The way people state facts when they've made their peace with them. At 9:30, her shift ended. Ethan was still there. He didn't entirely know why. He'd told himself he'd leave after the pasta, then after the tiramisu, then after one more glass of water. Claire came back to his table in her regular clothes, a simple blue jacket, jeans, hair still pulled back, and looked at him with a curious expression. Still here, he agreed. Do you want to sit? She hesitated for exactly 2 seconds. Then she sat. They talked until the restaurant began stacking chairs around them. She told him about her mother, about the apartment they shared in a building with a broken elevator, about the bakery she thought about constantly and had zero capital to pursue. She'd filled 3 notebooks with recipes and floor plans and projected costs and names. She'd settled on little proof, a nod to the proofing process in bread making, which she'd explained to him with a level of enthusiasm that made the technical information genuinely interesting. He told her he worked in business. Small scale, he said vaguely. Struggling, honestly. The market had been hard. She didn't press him. She didn't look at him with recalibrating eyes. She said, as long as you're trying, that's enough. He'd sat with those words for a moment, turned them over. He couldn't remember the last time someone had said something like that to him. He asked her to dinner 3 days later. Not anywhere impressive. A small cafe on Ridgeline Street that served good coffee and acceptable sandwiches and had mismatched chairs. He wore the oldest jeans he owned. He took the car he kept specifically for the experiments, a 2014 Civic with a scratch along the passenger door that he'd never bothered to repair. She was already there when he arrived, sitting in the window with her hands wrapped around a mug, and she looked up when he walked in and smiled the way people smile when they're actually glad to see you. They ordered. They talked. At some point, he reached for the check and his card declined. He'd arranged it that way, switched it out that morning for a card he knew had a zero balance, an old one he'd kept precisely for this purpose. He made a show of checking his wallet. I'm sorry, Don't worry about it, Claire said, and she was already pulling out her own wallet, already sliding her card toward the reader without a flicker of irritation or contempt, just a kind matter-of-factness, the way you'd hand someone an umbrella in the rain. He watched her hand. No performance, no martyrdom, no mental calculation behind her eyes, just warmth. He began falling, and he recognized it the way you recognize a familiar road, not because you wanted to be on it, but because your feet already knew the way. 3 weeks passed. He saw her 4 more times. Each one felt less like a test, and more like something he didn't have a word for yet, something that was slowly filling in a shape he hadn't realized was empty. Then the restaurant closed. Aldane's lease fell apart. The owner had been fighting the landlord for months over a rent increase, and one Thursday the sign went up in the window, and by Friday the staff had been let go. Claire texted him that afternoon, and he could hear the shock in the flatness of the words. Asterisk, the restaurant closed. Lost my job. I'll figure it out. I always do. Asterisk. He stared at his phone in his office on the 38th floor. He could fix this. Not just fix it. He could erase it. One phone call, and he could ensure Claire had a position at any of his hospitality properties with better pay, better hours, better everything. One wire transfer, and her mother's medical expenses became manageable. One conversation with his real estate team, and Little Proof Bakery could be opened before Christmas. He sat with his phone in his hand and didn't make any of those calls. Because the moment he did, the truth followed. And the truth was a door he'd been holding shut for weeks now, pressing his whole weight against it. And he was afraid of what would happen when it swung open. If he helped her, she'd find out who he was. And if she found out who he was, she'd wonder whether any of it had been real. And if she wondered that, he put his phone down. He picked it up again. He put it down. He went home that night and sat by the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked at the city lights and felt, for the first time in years, genuinely lost. He didn't know that the door was already swinging open without him. The following Tuesday, Marcus had asked Ethan to step out of the office building for a brief meeting with a contractor, and the car had been waiting at the curb, the real car, the one he kept for actual life, a black S-Class that tended to stop traffic. And Ethan had stepped out in his actual clothes and his actual watch, and the contractor had called him Mr. Cole, and across the street at the corner coffee cart, Claire had been waiting for her order. She'd seen him. He didn't know it then. He'd gotten in the car and gone to the meeting and come back and worked until 10 and gone home and thought about calling her. She'd gone home and opened her laptop. Ethan Cole, she'd typed. She'd sat very still for a long time, scrolling. The net worth estimates. The profiles in business publications. The photographs at industry events. The same face, but polished, powerful, contained. A face she recognized from late-night conversations in a restaurant after closing, but distant from it, like a photograph of a place you've only ever seen in real life. Asterisk, self-made billionaire. Notoriously private. Has not been publicly linked romantically in several years. Asterisk. She closed the laptop. She didn't text him that night. Or the next morning. On Thursday, she called him. Can you meet me? She said. Ridgeline. Same cafe. He heard something in her voice. Flat. Careful. The voice of someone who's made a decision about how they're going to hold themselves together. He was there in 20 minutes. She was already seated. She had both hands around her mug again, but this time she wasn't drinking from it. She was looking at the table. He sat down across from her. She looked up. There it was, not anger, not quite. Something more precise than anger. Something that had taken a careful shape. You own things, she said. Not a question. He held her gaze. Yes. Big things. Yes. She said the number. His approximate net worth, the one the publications tended to use. She said it carefully, like it was in a foreign language she hadn't practiced enough. Roughly, he said. A beat of silence. The declined card, she said. Arranged. The old car. Kept for specific use. The struggling in business. He didn't answer that one because there was nothing to say that wasn't just a more elaborate version of yes. She nodded slowly. She looked back down at her mug. When she looked up again, her eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with happiness. I'm not upset that you have money, Ethan. I know. I'm upset, she said, steadier now. That you looked at me across a table every single time and thought, she's not worth the truth. That's what you decided. Over and over again. That I was someone to test. Not someone to trust. He opened his mouth. She held up one hand. I took care of a stranger's tab once because he forgot his wallet. I gave half my last paycheck to the busboy at Aldane because he had a kid and I didn't. I sat with you for hours and I was real with you. And you were. She stopped. Started again. You were performing. It wasn't, he stopped. Started more carefully. It didn't start as a performance with you. That's the truth. But you kept it going. Yes. She pushed her chair back. She picked up her bag. She stood, and she looked at him for one long moment with an expression that was somehow worse than anger. It was disappointment, the kind that comes from someone who'd had higher expectations than they'd admitted to themselves. Goodbye, Ethan, she said. And she walked out. He sat alone at the mismatched table in the Ridgeline Cafe and did not move for a very long time. He'd walked away from deals worth hundreds of millions without losing sleep. He'd navigated hostile acquisitions, board mutinies, regulatory crises, public failures, all of it with the particular steadiness of a man who'd learned early that emotion was expensive. He'd rebuilt from the Vivian wreckage without drama. He'd let every blind date walk away from table 7 without so much as a phone call the following day. He sat in that cafe and felt the particular weight of a man who had, for the first time, something specific to lose. He didn't sleep that night. He stood at the windows until 3 in the morning and thought about what she'd said. You looked at me and thought she's not worth the truth. He turned that sentence over and over, looking for the angle where it didn't apply to him, and he couldn't find one. He'd told himself the test was self-protection, and maybe it had started that way. But somewhere between the spilled water and the declined card and 4 conversations that had felt more honest than anything he'd had in years, the test had become something he hid behind because he was afraid. Not of being used. Of being known and still not being enough. He showed up at her apartment at 7 the next evening. Not in the S-Class. Not in a suit. Not with anything. Just him, in the same wrinkled shirt he'd worn to Celestine 2 months ago, standing in the hallway of a building with a broken elevator on the 4th floor, waiting. She opened the door and looked at him. I'm not here with a solution, he said. I'm not here to fix anything or write a check or make it easier. He stopped. He wasn't used to sentences that didn't go where he'd planned. I pretended to be broke because I was afraid. Not of being betrayed again. I told myself that, but it wasn't really that. I was afraid of someone seeing all of it. The whole thing. And still deciding I wasn't worth staying for. The money makes that test easy because nobody leaves money. But you left. And you didn't leave because of money. You left because I hadn't trusted you. He looked at her. You're the first person in a long time who made me want to stop hiding. And I'm sorry I waited until I'd already hurt you to figure that out. She stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, and her eyes very still. I'm not asking you to forgive me tonight, he said. Or any night. That's yours to decide. I just needed you to know that what I felt, what I feel, that part wasn't a performance. She didn't answer right away. He didn't fill the silence. After a long moment, she uncrossed her arms. She didn't say come in. She didn't say I forgive you. She said, there's coffee if you want it. And she walked back into the apartment and left the door open. He stood in the hallway for exactly 1 second. Then he stepped inside and closed the door behind him. It wasn't fast after that. and it wasn't easy, and he didn't expect it to be. Trust, he was learning, was a different kind of thing from money. It didn't accumulate with interest. You had to re-earn it slowly, the same small increments, and you didn't get to rush the process just because you understood why it mattered. He started simply. Honestly, he stopped performing and started existing. Just Ethan, messy and uncertain and learning how to be seen. He found out about Little Proof through a conversation, not a strategy session. Claire had been looking at commercial spaces, and the math wasn't working, and she mentioned it the way she mentioned most things, as a fact she was making peace with. He listened. He thought about it afterward. He made some calls. He structured it as a small business loan through one of his investment entities, specifically so his name wouldn't be on the front of it. The terms were favorable. The space was on Archer Street, good foot traffic, high ceilings, original brick. He put the deed in her name from the first day. He told her, eventually. He told her everything he'd done and why and how it was structured, and he showed her all the documents so she could see he hadn't taken a stake, hadn't claimed control, hadn't built himself a back door. She sat with the papers for a long time. Why? She finally asked. Because it's your dream, he said, and I wanted to support it, not own it. Opening day of Little Proof was a Saturday in February, cold but bright, the kind of day that makes the city look freshly washed. There was a line out the door before 9, which Claire would later say she hadn't seen coming, even though everyone else had. The window display was simple, a single loaf of bread on a white cloth with small handwritten cards describing the process of making it. And inside, the smell of cardamom and yeast and butter had made at least 3 people stop in the doorway just to breathe. Ethan stood in line. He'd come alone. He wore the same coat he always wore, unremarkable, and he stood behind a woman with a stroller and in front of 2 teenagers who were debating what to order, and he waited his turn the same as everyone else. When he reached the counter, Claire was there. She'd seen him through the window. He knew she had, because she had the expression she got when she was trying not to look like she'd noticed something. Welcome to Little Proof, she said. Thank you, he said seriously. First time. Good choice. She leaned on the counter. What can I get you? Surprise me. She studied him for a moment. Then she reached back and pulled a small paper bag off the shelf and set it in front of him. Cardamom morning bun. Made them at 4 a.m. They're the best thing in the case. He reached for his wallet. She put her hand over his. It's on the house, she said. This one's on me. The teenagers behind him made the noise teenagers make at moments like that, and the woman with the stroller smiled at nothing in particular, and Ethan Cole, Billionaire, CEO, the man who had once sat alone at table 7 with a $4,000 bottle of wine, stood at the counter of a small bakery on Archer Street and felt something in his chest that he hadn't felt since he was young enough to believe in things before the world taught him otherwise. She came around the counter during a lull and stood beside him, and they looked out the window together at the line that was still growing, at the city moving in its usual, indifferent way around this small, warm place she'd built. Thank you, she said quietly. He looked at her. Not for the money, she said. For standing in line. He thought about Vivian, about table 7, about all the women who had weighed him and found him useful or insufficient depending on the number attached to his name. He thought about the version of himself that had believed the only way to be loved was to hide what he had and see who stayed. I spent years, he said slowly, trying to find someone who'd love me without the money. And he looked at the paper bag in his hands, at the small handwritten tag on it that said made with patience in her handwriting. Turns out I just needed to find someone worth being honest with. She was quiet for a moment. Then she took the paper bag from him, set it on the counter, pulled him forward by the front of his coat, and kissed him in front of the whole line, and the teenagers, and the woman with the stroller, and the bright cold February morning pressing itself against the glass. He spent years pretending to be poor to find someone real. He found her when he stopped pretending, and she didn't care about the billions. She just wanted him. If you love this wonderful story, kindly hit that like button. It helps us bring you even more wonderful stories, and if you want more stories like this one, subscribe to this channel. Drop a comment below.